They said the old Whitaker farm was dead, but the dog heard something beneath the dust that no one else had stayed long enough to notice. Claire Whitaker reached the end of the county road just after sunrise, when the Montana sky was still pale as watered milk and the frost lay thin over the pasture grass. Her pickup rolled slowly between two leaning fence posts, the tires crunching over gravel, the engine sounding too loud in a place that had spent years learning silence. On both sides of the driveway, 36 acres of tired land stretched toward low brown hills, with brittle weeds caught in the wire fencing and empty fields flattened by wind. The red barn stood north of the farmhouse, faded almost pink by weather, its roof bowed in the middle and one sliding door hanging uneven on the track. Beyond it, a windmill turned once, then stopped, as if it had remembered there was no water left to pull. Claire kept both hands on the steering wheel even after she parked. She was 40 years old, a white female veteran with a strong, weathered face, light brown hair pulled back beneath a dark knit cap, and eyes the color of rain on slate, steady but tired from years of looking farther than she wanted to remember. She wore a faded army green field jacket over a gray thermal shirt, worn blue jeans, and scuffed work boots that had crossed deserts, airports, job sites, and motel parking lots without ever quite finding home. Beside her, Atlas sat upright in the passenger seat, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, darker over the saddle and ears, lighter along the chest and legs, with a faint gray shadow around his muzzle that made him look older in wisdom than in years. His amber eyes were fixed on the barn. Not the house. Not the open fields. The barn. Claire followed his stare and felt an old uneasiness move through her ribs. The lawyer in Billings had called the farm an inheritance. The woman at the gas station 10 miles back had called it a shame. One man at the diner, not knowing who Claire was, had said Raymond Whitaker should have sold the place before it swallowed the last good years out of him. Claire had said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence could be armor, even when it felt heavy. Her father had died 3 weeks earlier in a small hospital room with a view of a parking lot and a cottonwood tree. Claire had not made it in time. By the time she arrived, Raymond Whitaker was gone, and the only thing waiting for her was a packet of papers, a brass key, and a farm she had spent half her life trying not to miss. She had come to see at once, sort what could be saved, and sell what remained. That was the plan. Plans had always helped her keep moving. Atlas shifted before she opened the door. His ears rose high, sharp and certain. A low breath moved out of him, not a growl, not fear, but recognition. Claire looked at him. "Easy, boy," she said softly, though there was nothing easy in the way he watched the barn. She stepped out into the cold, and the smell of the place met her all at once: dry grass, old hay, dust, machine oil, fenced cedar, and the faint iron scent of weathered tin. For a moment she was 17 again, standing in the same yard with a duffel bag at her feet, while her father stood by the porch steps, jaw tight, hands shoved into the pockets of his work coat. She remembered telling him she had enlisted. She remembered waiting for him to say he was proud. Instead, Raymond had looked past her toward the fields and said the north pasture fence would not fix itself. That was how he had said goodbye. Or maybe, Claire thought now, that was how he had failed to say please stay. Atlas jumped down from the truck and walked ahead, paws pressing into frost, tail low, body focused. Claire expected him to sniff the porch, circle the farmhouse, maybe search for mice under the steps. Instead, he crossed the driveway with a straightness that made the morning feel suddenly narrow. He stopped halfway between the farmhouse and the barn, lifted his nose toward the north wall, and gave 3 short barks. The sound cracked across the empty yard and faded into the hills. Claire stood still. The wind moved through the dry grass in long silver waves. Somewhere inside the barn, a loose chain tapped once against wood. Atlas did not move. He stared at the old red doors as if someone had called his name from the other side. Claire took the brass key from her jacket pocket and closed her fingers around it. The metal was cold enough to sting. On the key ring, tied with a strip of worn leather, was a small tag in her father's handwriting. She had noticed it before but had not let herself read it carefully. Now she turned it over. North Barn first. The words were plain, blunt, and unmistakably Raymond. Claire looked from the tag to Atlas, then to the barn where dust glowed faintly through the cracks in the boards. She had thought she was returning to bury the past, sign papers, and leave before the land could ask anything of her. But Atlas had already chosen a direction, and the farm, dead or not, seemed to be holding its breath. Claire started toward the barn with the dog at her side, and with every step, the old place felt less like something her father had abandoned and more like something he had hidden carefully, waiting for the right heart to come back and listen. The barn doors resisted at first, swollen by years of weather and neglect, but Claire leaned her shoulder into the old wood until the track groaned and the opening widened enough for morning light to enter. Dust stirred in the beam like pale smoke. Atlas slipped through before her, silent except for the soft click of his nails on the worn boards. Claire followed, and the air inside wrapped around her with the familiar ache of hay, machine oil, dry rope, and sun-warmed lumber. The barn had not changed as much as she expected. Time had damaged it, yes, bending the rafters slightly and loosening boards along the west wall, but Raymond Whitaker's order remained everywhere. Tack hooks lined one beam in perfect spacing. Mason jars filled with nails sat on a shelf by size. A rusted tractor part rested on a workbench beside a handwritten label. Even the broken things had been kept as if they might still have one useful day left in them. Claire stood just inside the doorway, letting her eyes adjust. When she was a girl, this barn had seemed enormous, a whole wooden world with ladders, feed bins, swallows in the rafters, and her father moving through it before sunrise like a man who belonged to the land more than to any room in the house. She remembered sitting on an overturned bucket while he repaired a gate hinge, waiting for him to ask about school, about her plans, about anything that lived beyond fences and weather. He had asked whether she had checked the water trough. At 17, she had heard only indifference. At 40, standing in the stillness he left behind, she wondered how many questions a hard man hides inside chores because tenderness feels too exposed. Atlas was already at the north corner. He stood near a stack of old feed sacks, body angled toward the floor, ears forward, tail low. Claire crossed the barn slowly, careful where the boards dipped beneath her boots. The stack of sacks had been arranged too neatly to be random. Their burlap was brittle with age, and each one bore the same faded stamp from a grain supplier in Great Falls. Atlas sniffed along the base, then lifted one paw and tapped the floor 3 times. Claire knelt beside him. The boards there were darker than the rest, not rotted, but stained as though they had been replaced and oiled long ago. She removed 2 feed sacks, then 3 more, coughing softly as dust rose into the cold air. Beneath them lay a square outline cut into the floor, so fine she might have missed it if Atlas had not led her straight there. Her father had always been good with seams. Fence seams, roof seams, engine seams, the places things could split if no one paid attention. She ran her fingers along the edge until she found a recessed iron ring nearly hidden under dirt. The metal was cold and rough against her skin. Atlas sat back, watching. Claire hesitated. It was one thing to inherit a farm on paper. It was another to kneel in the barn of a man you had not forgiven and find proof that he had been leaving instructions like breadcrumbs. She pulled. The hatch lifted with a dry wooden sigh. Beneath it was a shallow compartment lined with oilcloth and cedar strips, protected from mice and weather. Inside sat a rectangular tin box, dark green once, now scratched to bare metal at the corners. A folded canvas map lay beneath it, along with a small brass key tied to red twine. Claire lifted the box carefully and set it on the floor between her knees. On the lid, written in Raymond's square handwriting, were the words for Claire, "If she comes back with a dog that listens." Her throat tightened before she could stop it. Atlas leaned close and sniffed the lid, then looked up at her as if the words made perfect sense to him. Claire opened the box. Inside was a photograph, a yellowed envelope, a small leather notebook, and a silver charm shaped like a wheat stalk. The photograph showed Raymond much younger, standing beside the barn with one arm around a woman Claire did not recognize. The woman had dark hair tucked under a straw hat and a smile full of sunlight. Between them stood a German shepherd, older than Atlas but with the same proud posture and watchful eyes. On the back of the photograph, Raymond had written, June and Shepherd, North Line, before the spring went quiet. Claire read the names once, then again. June. Shepherd. No one had ever told her those names. She opened the envelope next. The paper inside was brittle, and her father's handwriting filled only half the page. If you are reading this, the farm did not let you leave without asking one last thing. Do not trust what people say about dry land. Dry does not always mean dead. Sometimes water is only waiting beneath the right stone. Let the dog take you to the North Line. Claire lowered the letter to her lap. Outside, wind moved along the barn wall, slipping through cracks and making the old boards murmur. She had expected unpaid taxes, broken equipment, maybe a few family records. Not this. Not a hidden box addressed to a version of herself her father had still believed might return. Atlas stood and walked to the open barn door. He looked back once, amber eyes steady, then turned toward the pasture beyond the north fence. Claire gathered the photograph, the key, the notebook, and the map. As she rose, the barn seemed to grow around her, less empty than before. The tools, the feed sacks, the careful labels, the hidden hatch, all of it began to feel like a language Raymond had spoken after words failed him. She stepped into the doorway beside Atlas and looked across the brittle grass toward the far edge of the farm, where a lightning-scarred oak stood alone against the pale Montana sky. The tree was blackened down one side, split but still alive, its bare branches lifted like hands refusing to surrender. Atlas gave one soft bark, not urgent, but certain. Claire folded the letter and slipped it into her jacket pocket, close to her heart. She had spent years believing her father loved the land more than he loved her. Now the land itself had begun answering back, and every answer seemed to carry his handwriting. The walk to the North Line took Claire across land she thought she remembered, though every step proved memory had left things out. Atlas moved ahead of her through the brittle pasture grass, not running, not wandering, but following some invisible thread that seemed to pull him toward the lightning-scarred oak at the far edge of the property. The morning had warmed slightly, enough for frost to release its hold on the weeds and gather in clear drops along the fence wire. Under Claire's boots, the ground gave off the dusty, mineral smell of old fields after a cold night. She carried the canvas map folded under one arm, the brass key in her jacket pocket, and Raymond's letter close against her chest, where it seemed heavier than paper had any right to be. The farm stretched wide and quiet around her. To the west, the farmhouse sat low against the sky, white paint peeling, porch screens loose, its windows dark but watchful. To the east, the barn stood open, a red shape in the distance with one door shifted by wind. Everything looked poor, tired, and nearly spent. Yet Atlas kept moving as though the land beneath them was not empty at all, only covered. Claire opened the leather notebook as she walked and found pages filled with her father's notes. Some were plain weather records. First hard freeze, October 3rd. North wind all week. Coyotes near creek bed. Others were stranger. Soil damp under oak after dry month. Shepherd marked stone again. June says old spring line may still breathe. Claire stopped when she saw the name June. She looked back at the photograph tucked into the notebook's inner pocket, the woman in the straw hat smiling beside Raymond before the years had narrowed his face. Claire had never heard of June, never heard of the dog named Shepherd, never heard of a spring beneath the north pasture. Her father had carried whole chapters of life without placing them where his daughter could read them. That thought might have made her angry the day before. Now it made her sad in a way that softened rather than sharpened. Atlas reached the oak and stood beneath it, nose raised to the split trunk. The tree was enormous, older than the farmhouse, with roots like the backs of sleeping animals pushing through the earth. Lightning had carved a black seam down one side, but new bark had grown around the wound, and a few stubborn leaves still clung high among the branches, copper-colored in the cold sun. Atlas circled the base once, then stopped at a tangle of roots where weeds had grown thick. He lowered his head and began nosing aside dry grass with careful precision. Claire knelt beside him. At first she saw only dirt, stones, and fallen acorns. Then her fingers brushed something flat and hard beneath the soil. She cleared it slowly, using a broken stick so she would not damage whatever lay below. A stone marker emerged, rectangular and weathered, set deep between the roots. Its top bore a carved W, nearly filled with dirt, and beneath it an arrow pointing north. Claire cleaned the carving with her sleeve. Atlas gave a soft huff and moved 3 feet beyond the marker, where a rusted iron cap sat half hidden under mud and grass. It was smaller than a manhole cover, round, with a ring folded flat against its center. Claire's pulse changed. She took the brass key from her pocket, though she saw no lock, only then noticing a narrow slot beneath the ring, clogged with earth. The key fit after she cleared it with the tip of her pocket knife. It turned stiffly, then released with a faint metallic click. Claire gripped the ring and pulled. The cap rose an inch, then stuck. Atlas stepped closer, watching her, and Claire almost laughed despite the tightness in her chest. "All right," she whispered, "I hear you." She pulled again, harder this time, and the cap lifted free with a wet sucking sound. Beneath it was a dark vertical shaft lined with old stone, no wider than a barrel, with iron rungs descending into shadow. From below came a breath of cool air carrying a scent so unexpected Claire froze. Water. Not strong, not rushing, but clean and unmistakable, the smell of wet rock and underground spring. For a moment the whole farm seemed to pause around her. The dry pasture, the silent windmill, the empty troughs, the cracked soil under her boots, all of it stood in quiet contradiction to that single living scent. Atlas leaned over the opening, ears forward, then stepped back and looked toward the farmhouse as if one discovery had already begun pointing toward another. Claire sat back on her heels and unfolded the canvas map. The north line was marked in Raymond's hand, but under the oak someone else had drawn a small blue circle and written Spring House sealed after flood. "Do not let Landry see this." The last sentence changed the air. Claire read it again. Landry. She knew the name from the letter packet the lawyer had mailed, a company called Landry Development that had made repeated offers to buy the farm after Raymond's health failed. Their letters had described the acreage as low yield, water poor, and unsuitable for long-term agricultural recovery. Claire had almost believed them because she had wanted a reason not to care. Now, kneeling beside a hidden spring shaft with the scent of water rising through the cold, she wondered how much of the farm's death had been truth and how much had been convenience for people waiting to purchase grief at a discount. The wind shifted. From somewhere beyond the fence came the distant rattle of a truck on the county road. Atlas turned his head sharply, not alarmed, only aware. Claire replaced the iron cap without locking it, covering it loosely with grass. She did not know why, only that her father's warning had settled into her bones. "Do not let Landry see this." She gathered the notebook, map, and photograph, then stood beneath the oak. The black scar in the trunk ran from crown to root, but the tree still held itself upright, split and living. Claire placed one hand against the bark. It was rough, cold, and real. She thought of Raymond standing here years before with June and Shepard, listening to water under the ground while everyone else saw only dry land. She thought of the last words he had not said when she left, and how this place, stubborn and wounded, had somehow become his way of speaking after death. Atlas touched his nose to her hand, then began walking back toward the farmhouse, slower now, as though giving her time to follow. Claire looked once more across the pasture. The farm no longer seemed dead. It seemed hidden, misjudged, and waiting beneath the right stone, exactly as her father had written. She slipped the brass key back into her pocket, and followed Atlas home, carrying with her the first sound of water she had heard on Whitaker land in half a lifetime. Claire had not made it halfway back to the farmhouse when the truck appeared on the county road, a dark green pickup moving slowly beyond the fence line as if the driver had no destination except to be seen. Atlas noticed it before she did. He stopped in the pasture with his body angled toward the sound, ears raised, tail still, his amber eyes following the vehicle through the shimmer of noon light. Claire paused beside him and watched the truck pass the gate without turning in. It rolled on another 100 yards, slowed near the old cottonwood by the ditch, then continued toward the rise that led out of Whitaker land. Nothing about it was openly threatening. It was just a truck on a rural road. Still, the sight settled uneasily in her stomach because her father's warning lay folded in her pocket beside the brass key. "Do not let Landry see this." The words had turned the landscape sharper. The fence posts, the tire tracks, the dry creek bed, even the distant glint of the windmill seemed to hold information she had not yet learned how to read. Atlas gave one low breath and resumed walking, this time closer to her leg. The farmhouse waited ahead, square and weathered under the pale Montana sky, its porch sagging slightly on the east side, its white paint peeled down to gray wood along the corners. Claire climbed the steps and opened the back door with the second key from the lawyer's packet. The kitchen smelled like dust, old coffee, and closed rooms. Morning light lay across a table scarred by years of knives, elbows, bills, and weather reports. On the counter, a blue enamel mug sat upside down beside the sink, exactly the kind Raymond had used every morning. Claire stood in the doorway longer than she meant to. The house did not welcome her loudly. It simply held its breath, the way people do when they do not know whether forgiveness has arrived with the visitor. Atlas crossed the kitchen, sniffed the cabinet beneath the sink, then moved into the hallway. Claire followed, passing framed photographs turned pale by sun. There she was at 9 years old on a pony named Daisy. There was Raymond in his good shirt at a county fair. There was her mother, gone so long Claire sometimes remembered her more through smells than images, lavender soap, flour on hands, rain on laundry. In the hallway, an old rotary phone still hung on the wall, though the line had likely been dead for years. Beneath it was a corkboard with yellow notes, vet receipts, seed orders, and a calendar stopped in March. Atlas stopped at the cellar door. It was painted the same dull white as the trim, with a simple latch and a dark brass knob polished by decades of hands. Claire felt the change in him before he made a sound. His shoulders lowered, his head tilted, and he listened not to the door, but through it. She remembered the hidden spring shaft under the oak, the damp breath rising from stone. The cellar was on the opposite side of the house, yet somehow Atlas seemed to connect the two places in a line only he could sense. Claire opened the door. A cool smell rose from below, earthy and close, mixed with cedar, canned peaches, and the faint metallic scent of old pipes. Wooden steps descended into shadow. She found a flashlight in the mudroom, tapped it twice until it came on, and went down with Atlas just behind her. The cellar was larger than she remembered. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with dusty jars, empty crates, sacks of rock salt, coils of twine, and coffee cans full of bolts. At the far end stood an old worktable beneath a bare bulb. Claire pulled the chain, expecting nothing, but the light flickered once and glowed weakly, warm enough to make the glass jars shine like amber. Atlas walked straight past the shelves to a tall cabinet shoved against the stone wall. It was filled with empty mason jars, all arranged with the labels facing outward: peaches, beans, chokecherry jam, apple butter. Too neat. Claire had learned that much about Raymond in a single morning. When something looked too neat, it was probably hiding a seam. Atlas placed one paw against the bottom of the cabinet, and looked back. Claire set down the flashlight and pushed. The cabinet shifted less than an inch. She braced her boots against the floor and pushed again. The wood scraped softly, revealing a narrow vertical crack in the stone behind it. A small door, no higher than her shoulder, had been built into the wall and painted to match the cellar rock. The brass key from the barn fit the lock. Claire's hands were steady as she turned it, but her breath was not. The door opened inward, and cedar-scented air moved out like a secret finally allowed to speak. Beyond it was a low room, finished with rough pine boards and lit by a small battery lantern sitting on a shelf. Claire found the switch beside the door, pressed it, and the lantern flickered to life with a weak golden glow. Inside were file boxes, rolled maps, a metal cash box, 3 framed photographs wrapped in cloth, and a long table covered with papers organized into careful stacks. At the center lay a folder labeled Whitaker Farm Renewal Project. Claire stepped inside slowly. Atlas remained at the threshold, calm and watchful, as though this was not a place to rush. She opened the folder. The first page was a hand-drawn plan of the farm, repaired barn, restored spring house, north pasture irrigation, 6 small cabins near the cottonwoods, a shared kitchen in the farmhouse, garden plots, a workshop, and a note in Raymond's hand: work, shelter, and second chances. Claire sat down at the table before her knees could decide for her. Beneath the plan were letters from veterans organizations, water rights documents dating back 70 years, soil tests, grant applications, and copies of rejected offers from land redevelopment. Each offer had been marked in red pencil with a single word: no. In the metal cash box she found savings records, trust papers, and an envelope addressed to her. "My Claire," it began, "if you found this room, then Atlas or some good dog like him knew where my courage ran out." The sentence loosened something in her. Outside, above the cellar, the old farmhouse creaked in the wind, but down in that cedar room, Claire heard the truer sound beneath it all. Her father had not been clinging to dead land. He had been guarding a living promise, and he had hidden it not because he wanted to keep her out, but because he wanted her to choose the door herself. Claire did not open the envelope right away. She sat in the cedar room beneath the farmhouse with the paper resting between her hands, feeling the weight of her father's handwriting before allowing herself to enter it. Atlas lay at the threshold, his black and tan body stretched across the line between cellar shadow and lantern light, as if guarding both the past and whatever waited beyond it. Above them, the farmhouse made small settling sounds in the wind. Down here, everything was still: the file boxes, the maps, the water rights papers, the savings records, the rejected offers marked no, and the folder that gave the old farm a name larger than land: Whitaker Farm Renewal Project. Claire finally unfolded the letter. "My Claire," her father had written, "I know land can look like a chain when it is handed to a daughter who spent her life trying to become free. I never wanted this place to trap you. I only wanted it to remain standing in case the world ever made you tired enough to need ground under your feet again." Claire stopped there. The words blurred, and she looked away toward the rough pine wall. Raymond Whitaker had never spoken like that across a kitchen table. He had spoken in weather reports, fence repairs, feed orders, oil changes, and short sentences that seemed built to survive drought. Yet here, hidden under the farmhouse, he had left words soft enough to bruise. She read on. "When you enlisted, I was proud and scared, and I let fear come out sounding like anger. I thought if I spoke against your leaving, it would keep you safe. Instead, I sent you away thinking I valued soil more than my own child. That is the failure I have carried longest." Claire pressed the heel of her hand to her eyes. She remembered that day so clearly she could still smell dust rising from the driveway and hear the loose porch screen tapping in the wind. She had waited for pride and received silence shaped like disappointment. For years she had turned that memory into proof. Proof that her father had chosen the farm. Proof that she had been right to go. Proof that coming back would only reopen a door to a house that had never known how to hold her gently. Atlas lifted his head and gave a small breath, not asking, only reminding her that she was not alone in the room. Claire continued. "June Alder helped me understand what this land could become. She was a water surveyor before she became my friend, and she knew the old spring line was not gone, only buried after the flood. Her dog, Shepherd, found the first marker under the oak. I laughed at her then. She said dogs do not waste time proving things to stubborn people. They simply stand where truth is." Claire glanced at Atlas, and despite the tears drying on her face, a faint smile came and went. The letter explained the photograph from the tin box. June had come to Whitaker Farm nearly 25 years earlier to assess water damage after a spring flood had shifted the north pasture. She had found evidence of an older spring house, a buried water line, and a set of water rights filed by Claire's grandfather but nearly forgotten in county records. Raymond had almost sold a portion of the land that year, but June convinced him to wait. Then veterans from the surrounding counties began drifting through after hard seasons, some needing day work, some needing a meal, some needing only a quiet field where no one expected them to explain themselves. The farm had become useful before Raymond had known what to call it. Claire turned to the next page. "The money is not much, but it is clean. I sold the South Hay equipment, leased grazing rights for 3 seasons, repaired tractors for neighbors, and put every spare dollar into the trust. Martha Bell knows where the rest of the receipts are. She also knows more of the story than I had the courage to tell you." At the mention of Martha, Claire looked toward the cellar stairs. Martha Bell lived on the adjoining property, an older widow whose mailbox Claire had passed on the way in. Claire remembered her from childhood as a woman with silver braids, sharp eyes, and a habit of bringing warm rolls wrapped in towels whenever grief or weather struck a family. The letter went on. "Landry Development wants this farm because they know the water rights are worth more than dry acreage. They will call it worthless to your face if they think you are grieving enough to believe them. Do not argue with them alone. Take the papers to Nora Whitcomb in Miles City. She drew up the trust and knows the filings. If you sell, sell with open eyes. If you stay, stay because you choose it, not because a dead man asked." Claire lowered the letter and breathed slowly. There it was again, the mercy that hurt most. No command. No guilt. Just a choice placed carefully in her hands. On the table beside the folder sat a small tape recorder, one she had missed at first because it was tucked behind a box of labeled photographs. A cassette was inside. On its sticker, Raymond had written "Start" after the letter. Claire stared at it for a long moment. Then Atlas rose, crossed the room, and sat beside her knee. His presence steadied the air. She pressed play. Static filled the cedar room, followed by a chair creak, a cough, and then her father's voice, older and rougher than she remembered, but unmistakably his. "Claire," he said, "if that dog brought you this far, thank him for me. Shepard did the same for June, and I was too proud to admit I needed leading." The sound of his voice opened something no paper could. Claire covered her mouth with one hand. Raymond continued, slow and plain. "I do not know how to leave you a blessing without making it feel like work. Maybe that is because every blessing I ever trusted came wearing work boots. But this farm, if you want it, can feed people, shelter people, and give tired hands a reason to rise in the morning. It gave me that when I did not deserve it. Maybe it can give you something too." The tape clicked softly as it turned. Claire sat still, listening to a man who had spent his life speaking through chores finally tried to speak through his own voice. Above her, the house stood weathered and quiet. Outside, the spring breathed beneath the oak. Beside her, Atlas leaned his shoulder against her leg. For the first time since her father's death, Claire did not feel as though she had arrived too late. She felt as though someone had left a lantern burning underground, trusting she would find it when the dark had done all it could. The tape continued in Raymond Whitaker's slow, weathered voice, filling the cedar room beneath the farmhouse with words Claire had needed for more years than she had known. Static moved under his sentences like wine through dry grass, and every pause sounded like him choosing honesty over pride. "I kept the renewal project quiet because I was afraid you would think I was building another fence around your life," he said. "I know what this farm looked like from the outside. Work before sunrise. Bills on the table. Weather deciding whether a year would be kind or cruel. I know why you ran towards something that had rules clearer than mine." Claire sat with both hands wrapped around the tape recorder, her shoulders bent slightly, while Atlas rested against her leg. The old German shepherd did not sleep. He watched the doorway, listened to the room, and occasionally lifted his nose as if the house itself had more to say. Raymond's voice went on. "After June passed through here, she came back each spring to check the water line. She said the North Spring was like people. Shut in long enough and everyone assumes it is gone. But pressure keeps building in the dark. Give it the right opening, and life comes back through." Claire looked at the maps spread across the table. The blue ink lines now seemed less like drawings and more like veins. Spring house. North pasture. Irrigation trench. Garden plots. Cabins. Shared kitchen. Workshop. The plan was humble, practical, almost stubbornly plain, which made it more believable than any grand dream. Her father had not imagined a miracle falling from the sky. He had imagined shovel work, roof work, pipe work, fence work, coffee at dawn, And someone saying you can stay here while you get your feet under you. The tape clicked softly and Raymond continued. Martha told me once that I spent my whole life confusing silence with strength. She was right. So I asked her to do what I could not. If you came back angry, she was to let you be angry. If you came back ready to sell, she was to make sure you knew the value before signing. If you came back with a dog, she was to stay out of the way until the dog finished what people had failed to do. Claire let out a breath that almost became a laugh, but softened before it reached sound. Even in apology, Raymond had planned for weather, grief, stubbornness, and dogs. It was so like him that it hurt. The recording shifted, and in the background Claire heard what might have been the old kitchen clock. I left one more thing in the farmhouse, Raymond said. Not papers. Not money. Something I should have given you long ago. Atlas rose before Claire did. His ears tilted toward the stairs, and he walked out of the cedar room into the cellar shadows. Claire stopped the tape, tucked the letter into her jacket, and followed him. The cellar bulb still glowed weakly above the shelves of jars, casting amber light across dust and glass. Atlas did not go to the cabinet or the stairs. He moved to the far corner beneath the old coal chute, where a row of wooden apple crates sat stacked beneath a canvas tarp. Claire pulled the tarp aside. The crates were empty except for one small cedar box on the bottom shelf, about the size of a cigar box, with her name carved into the lid in careful block letters. Not Claire Whitaker. Just Claire. She carried it upstairs because something in her wanted daylight for whatever waited inside. The kitchen received her quietly. Afternoon had turned warm through the windows, laying soft squares of sun across the table and the blue enamel mug near the sink. Claire sat where she had eaten oatmeal as a child, where she had once done homework, while her father fixed a carburetor at the counter, where arguments had ended not with resolution but with chairs pushed back and doors closed too carefully. Atlas sat beside her. The cedar box opened without a key. Inside lay a folded American flag patch from one of her old uniforms, a school photograph she had mailed home and assumed he had thrown away, a newspaper clipping announcing her unit's return, and a stack of postcards tied with twine. Claire recognized the postcards at once. She had sent them from different states and bases, each one brief, guarded, almost formal. Still alive. Weather is hot. Atlas would hate the sand. Hope the tractor is running. She had sent them because not sending anything felt too final. Raymond had kept every one. Beneath them was a letter he had written but never mailed. My girl, it began, I do not know how to talk to you without sounding like I am asking you to come back and carry what was mine. I am proud of you. I was proud the day you left, proud in the wrong shape, proud with my mouth shut and my hands in my pockets. I have regretted that silence more than any bad season this farm ever saw. Claire pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. Outside, a truck door shut somewhere in the yard. Atlas stood, alert but calm. Claire looked through the kitchen window and saw an older woman stepping out of a dusty blue Subaru near the gate, carrying a covered basket in one hand and a folder under the other arm. Martha Bell had silver hair braided down her back, a brown wool coat, and the steady posture of someone who had delivered hard truths with warm bread for most of her life. She did not come to the door right away. She stood by the gate, looking toward the barn, then the oak, then the farmhouse, as if greeting old friends before asking permission to enter. Claire opened the back door. Martha looked up and smiled sadly. I wondered how long it would take Atlas to find what Raymond hid from everyone but the right daughter, she said. The words should have startled Claire, but they landed gently, like something the day had been moving toward all along. Martha climbed the steps and handed her the basket. Cinnamon rolls, she said. Your father always forgot to eat when old ghosts started talking. Claire stepped aside, and Martha entered the kitchen with the ease of someone who knew the house before grief changed its air. Atlas sniffed her sleeve, then wagged his tail once. Martha nodded to him with deep respect. Shepherd had that same look, she murmured. June used to say a good dog does not discover secrets. He only stands where love got buried. The kitchen fell quiet. Claire set the basket on the table beside the cedar box, the old postcards, and the letter that finally said proud. Outside, wind crossed the pasture and moved toward the north line, where water waited under stone. Inside, the farm no longer felt like an inheritance she had to accept or reject. It felt like a conversation that had begun before she was born, passed through Raymond, June, Shepard, Martha, and now Atlas, until it reached the daughter who had thought leaving meant she could never be led home. Martha Bell sat at the kitchen table as if she had been part of the house longer than the chairs themselves. The cinnamon rolls steamed beneath a clean dish towel, filling the room with brown sugar, butter, and the kind of warmth that could make grief loosen its grip for a moment. Claire stood by the sink with her father's unmailed letter still in her hand, while Atlas lay near the back door, watchful but peaceful, his ears turning whenever the old farmhouse settled in the afternoon wind. Martha did not rush her. She removed her gloves finger by finger, placed them beside the folder she had brought, and looked around the kitchen with eyes that held both memory and mercy. "Your father changed the curtains twice after you left," she said at last, "not because he cared about curtains, but because he thought if the kitchen looked brighter, you might feel welcome if you ever came home." Claire looked toward the faded fabric over the window. Pale yellow. Sunflowers. Not Raymond's taste at all. The realization hurt in a soft place. Martha opened the folder and slid out a stack of papers, not legal documents at first, but photographs. Raymond standing beside the north oak with June Alder and her German shepherd, Shepard. Raymond repairing the barn roof with two men Claire did not know. Raymond serving coffee from a thermos to a young woman in a work jacket. The farmhouse porch with half a dozen muddy boots lined beneath it. The images were ordinary, almost plain, yet each one carried the weight of a hidden life. Martha tapped one photograph with a knuckle. "First winter after you enlisted," she said. A cold snap came through early. 3 veterans from Great Falls got stranded when their van broke down near the county road. Raymond let them sleep in the barn office, then the kitchen, then the spare room. By Christmas, he had a list of people who needed work, food, or somewhere quiet to be for a while. Claire sat slowly. She had spent years picturing her father alone and bitter, walking the same fields as if land had replaced family. But here were faces around him, tired faces, grateful faces, people gathered in the orbit of a man who had never known how to say please stay to his own daughter, yet had somehow built shelter for strangers. Martha seemed to understand the question before Claire asked it. "He did not tell you because he thought you would hear it as blame. As if he were saying, 'Look what I did while you were gone.' But it was never that. He was trying to make the farm worthy of your return without demanding it." Atlas rose then and crossed to Martha, placing his chin gently on her knee. The old woman smiled and rested a thin hand on his head. "Dogs have always known this place better than people," she murmured. Shepard found the spring marker. Atlas found the barn box. "I imagine he is not finished." As if answering, Atlas turned toward the hallway that led to the front room. His body went still in that focused way Claire now recognized. Martha watched him and nodded once. "The parlor," she said. "Raymond locked it after June died." Claire looked at her. "June died here?" Martha shook her head. "Not here. But this was where he kept her work. Her surveys, her maps, her last letter to him. He could open buried springs and broken tractors, but not that room." The parlor door stood just beyond the staircase, painted white but yellowed with age. Claire had passed it earlier without trying the knob, assuming it was a storage room. Atlas stood before it, not scratching, not whining, only waiting. Martha handed Claire a small iron key from her folder. "Your father gave me this 10 years ago. Said if you ever came home with a good dog, I would know when to hand it over." Claire took the key. Its weight was small but final. The lock turned easier than expected. When the door opened, the air inside smelled of cedar, paper, and dried lavender. Afternoon light filtered through lace curtains, touching a room untouched by ordinary time. A roll-top desk sat against one wall. Map tubes leaned in a wooden crate. A quilt covered a small couch. Above the mantel hung a framed watercolor of the farm in spring, green pasture, red barn, blue sky, water shining in a narrow channel from the north oak toward the fields. Claire stepped inside with Atlas at her side and Martha behind her. The room did not feel haunted. It felt preserved. On the desk lay June Alder's field journal, her handwriting graceful and precise. Claire opened it to a marked page. Raymond thinks the farm is failing because he believes everything that leaves him proves he deserved to be left. He is wrong about the water, and he is wrong about the girl. Both may return if he stops standing in the doorway like a guard and learns to become a porch light. Claire read the sentence twice. Martha wiped one eye with the back of her hand and pretended she had not. Atlas moved to the fireplace and sniffed the bricks. Behind a loose hearthstone, Claire found a flat metal box sealed with a rubber gasket. Inside were the original water rights documents, June's final survey, signed county filings, and a recent appraisal showing the farm was worth far more than Landry Development had claimed. Beneath the papers was a note in Raymond's hand. If they come before I can explain, this proves the water is ours. If Claire finds it, tell her the farm can live, but only if she wants to wake it. Claire held the appraisal while the last piece of Landry's lie settled into place. They had not wanted useless land. They had wanted a hidden spring, old water rights, and a grieving daughter willing to sell quickly. Anger rose in her, but it did not burn wild. It became clear, steady, useful. Martha placed Nora Whitcomb's business card on the desk. Call her tonight, she said. Then sleep before deciding anything. Tired people sign away miracles because paperwork looks easier than hope. Claire looked out the parlor window toward the north pasture. The lightning-scarred oak stood black against the gold light, split and living, guarding water beneath stone. Atlas sat beside her, calm as a promise. For the first time since arriving, Claire did not feel trapped by the farm, or chased by it, or judged by the memory of her father. She felt invited into a choice that was finally hers. Raymond had not left her a command hidden in old rooms. He had left her proof, protection, apology, and a path. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the hills, Claire carried the water documents, June's survey, and her father's note back to the kitchen table. Martha poured coffee as if they were beginning a long night of honest work. Atlas lay beneath the table with his head on Claire's boot. Outside, the windmill turned once, twice, then slowly began to move in a steady circle, catching a breeze that had been there all along. Claire watched it through the window and understood that some things do not come back all at once. Sometimes they begin with a dog standing still, a daughter opening a locked room, and water waiting in the dark for someone brave enough to believe the land is not finished. That night, the farmhouse did not feel empty. It creaked and settled around Claire, Martha, and Atlas like an old body remembering how to breathe with company inside it. The kitchen table had become a small command center of memory and proof. June Alder's survey, Raymond's note, the water rights filings, the Landry offers marked no, Nora Whitcomb's business card, and the cedar box of postcards Claire had once sent into the world without knowing her father kept every one. Martha poured coffee strong enough to hold up a spoon and set a cinnamon roll on a chipped plate in front of Claire, though either woman ate at first. Atlas lay beneath the table with his head on Claire's boot, his black and tan coat warm against her ankle, and every few minutes his ears shifted toward the north pasture as if the hidden spring were speaking through the dark. Claire called Nora Whitcomb just after 7. The attorney answered from Miles City with the brisk patience of someone used to emergencies disguised as paperwork. Claire explained what she had found, stopping twice when the words became too tangled with feeling. Martha took the phone once, filled in dates, names, and filing numbers, then handed it back. Nora listened without interrupting. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and low. She told Claire not to sign anything, not to return any calls from Landry Development, and not to unlock the spring house for anyone until the county records were confirmed in the morning. Then she said something that made Claire look toward the window where the moon lit the outline of the barn. Your father protected more than land, Nora said. He protected your right to choose without being the sled. After the call, silence settled over the kitchen, but it was a different silence than the one Claire had carried for years. Not the silence of distance. The silence before work begins. Martha leaned back in her chair and studied Claire with kind, sharp eyes. "You do not have to decide tonight," she said. "Your father knew that. He wrote it into every paper he filed." Claire looked down at the documents. The choice was real. She could sell later, honestly, with the water rights known and the farm valued properly. She could walk away with enough money to build an easier life somewhere else, somewhere with grocery stores close by and no ghosts in the curtains. Or she could stay long enough to see whether Raymond's impossible plan had roots. Work, shelter, and second chances. The words sounded too simple for what they asked, yet something in them kept returning to her like a refrain. Before dawn, Claire woke in her childhood room beneath a faded quilt she did not remember keeping. For a moment, she listened to the dark. The farmhouse was still. Atlas slept against the door, as he always did in unfamiliar places, though by now the farm seemed to know him better than most homes ever had. Claire dressed quietly, pulled on her boots, and went downstairs. Martha was asleep on the couch under an afghan, one hand resting near her folder as if even in sleep she was guarding the truth. Claire did not wake her. She made coffee, filled a thermos, and stepped outside with Atlas into a morning cold enough to turn her breath white. The sky over Montana was just beginning to pale. Frost silvered the pasture, the fence wire, the roof of the red barn. The windmill turned slowly, catching a thin current from the west. Claire walked to the north oak with the documents tucked safely in a canvas satchel and Atlas moving beside her. This time, she did not feel as though she was following a mystery. She felt as though she was keeping an appointment. At the spring shaft, she cleared away the grass, unlocked the iron cap, and lifted it carefully. The smell of water rose again, clean and cool. Atlas stood at the edge, silent and alert. Claire lowered a flashlight into the shaft, and saw the old iron rungs descending towards stonework below. She would not climb down alone. Nora had been clear. Still, she knelt there for a long while, listening. Under the earth, water made the faintest sound, not rushing, not dramatic, just patient. A living thing that had waited while men argued, companies offered, seasons failed, and a daughter stayed away because pain had taught her distance was safer than hope. Claire placed her palm on the cold rim of the spring opening. "I am here, Dad," she whispered, and the words did not feel like surrender. They felt like an answer. By mid-morning, Nora arrived with a county water officer and a survey technician in a white truck. Martha came out carrying more coffee, as if legal verification and neighborly hospitality belonged to the same sacred duty. The technician examined June's survey, checked the marker beneath the oak, and confirmed the old filings matched the spring shaft and north pasture line. The water officer, a broad woman with red cheeks and a practical wool hat, looked down into the opening, then across the dry acreage. "This changes the farm," she said simply. "Not magically. Not overnight. But legally, historically, and agriculturally, it changes everything." Claire did not speak. She looked at Atlas, who sat beneath the oak with frost melting on his whiskers, calm as if he had known the verdict long before people arrived with clipboards. Later, in the farmhouse kitchen, Nora laid out the path ahead. The trust Raymond created was valid. The water rights were active but needed restoration filings. The renewal project could begin as a small agricultural work program before any cabins were built. Nothing had to happen all at once. Claire could start with the spring, the barn, and the garden plots. She could invite help, not carry the whole farm alone. Martha nodded at that, firmly enough to make it sound like law. Claire listened, but her eyes kept moving to the window. Outside, sunlight reached the north pasture, and the lightning-scarred oak stood split and living. By late afternoon, the first shallow channel was opened from the spring house toward the old trough, with the technician supervising and Claire doing the shovel work herself. The soil was dark beneath the crust, damp where everyone had called it dead. When the first thin stream of water slipped along the wooden runnel Raymond had repaired years before, no one cheered. They simply watched. The water moved slowly, catching the light, carrying a small line of silver through brown earth. Atlas stepped forward and lowered his nose to it, then looked up at Claire. In that quiet gaze she felt the whole story gather: Raymond's regret, June's faith, Shepard's discovery, Martha's patience, Nora's protection, and her own long road away from home. Claire knelt in the grass and let the water touch her fingers. It was cold, clean, and real. The farm was not healed. Neither was she. But something had opened, and sometimes grace begins as a trickle before anyone dares call it a river. By the end of spring, the north pasture no longer looked like a field people had given up on. It did not become green all at once, and that was what made its return feel honest. First came the narrow silver line of water running from the restored spring house to the old trough. Then came darker soil along the channel, then small shoots of grass, then rows of vegetables planted by hands that had arrived unsure and stayed because the work gave them somewhere to place their worry. Claire Whitaker did not call the place saved. She had learned not to use large words too early. But each morning, when she stepped onto the farmhouse porch with a mug of coffee and saw the windmill turning above the pasture, she felt something in her own chest begin to move with it. The farmhouse windows were washed now. The porch screen no longer tapped loose in the wind. The red barn had fresh braces, patched roof panels, and a long table built from reclaimed boards where people gathered at noon for sandwiches, soup, and whatever Martha Bell decided everyone needed to eat. Atlas had claimed the patch of shade beneath the lightning-scarred oak as his post. From there, the 6-year-old German shepherd watched the farm with calm authority, his black and tan coat bright in the sun, the gray at his muzzle catching light whenever he lifted his head. No one crossed the north pasture without earning his attention, but he greeted honest arrivals with a single wag of his tail, and the steady patience of a dog who understood second chances better than most people. Nora Whitcomb helped Claire file every restoration paper properly. The county water officer returned twice and left both times with mud on her boots and approval in her notes. Landry Development sent one final letter offering a revised amount that would have once seemed impossible to refuse. Claire read it at the kitchen table while Martha buttered toast, Nora checked a permit, and Atlas lay with his chin on Claire's boot. She did not feel anger this time. Only clarity. She placed the letter in a folder marked declined and slid it into the cabinet beside Raymond's red-penciled no. That afternoon, she walked to the North Oak and told her father out loud that she had made her choice. The first person to stay more than one night was a widower named Samuel Reed, a former ranch hand from Wyoming whose truck had broken down outside Miles City. He arrived with a duffel bag, a cracked pair of gloves, and the careful politeness of someone expecting the world to ask for proof of his worth before offering a chair. Claire recognized that kind of caution. She had carried her own version of it for years. She told him there was coffee in the kitchen, spare bedding in the hall closet, and fence work in the morning if he wanted it. Not owed. Not required. Offered. Samuel looked past her toward the barn, the pasture, the moving water, and Atlas sitting in the yard like a quiet judge of character. Then he nodded once and stepped inside. After Samuel came 2 women from a veterans outreach program in Helena, one needing temporary work, the other helping organize garden beds. Then came a young man sent by Nora, good with engines and bad at asking for help. Then a retired school cook who volunteered on Thursdays and somehow turned every simple meal into a reason for people to sit longer. The farm did not become a shelter in the official sense right away. Claire was careful with that. It became a place to work, breathe, eat, sleep safely for a short while, and remember that usefulness and dignity could grow back from very dry ground. She hung Raymond's project plan in the farmhouse kitchen, beside June Alder's survey and the photograph of June, Raymond, and Shepard standing by the barn long before Claire understood what any of it meant. Under the photograph, Martha placed a small handwritten card, "Dogs stand where truth is." Claire pretended the card was too sentimental, but she never moved it. On a clear Sunday evening, just as the sun began to lower behind the brown hills, Claire carried the cedar box of postcards to the porch. Atlas followed and lay beside the steps. One by one, she reread the cards she had sent her father across all those years of distance. They were guarded, practical, almost painfully brief. Weather is hot. Truck running all right? Still alive. hope the north fence held. She had once believed they proved how little she had known how to say. Now she saw something else. She had kept writing. He had kept saving. Their love had been clumsy, wounded, badly timed, and real enough to survive in a box until both of them were ready to be understood. Claire placed the postcards back inside and carried the box to the parlor, where June's lavender scent still faintly lived in the old desk drawers. She set it beside Raymond's final letter, then walked outside as the first evening star appeared. Water moved softly in the runnel near the oak. The barn doors stood open, glowing with lamplight. From the kitchen came Martha's laugh, Nora's low voice, the scrape of chairs, the sounds of a house no longer holding its breath. Atlas rose and pressed his shoulder against Claire's leg. She rested a hand on his head and looked across the farm. She had not inherited a perfect place. She had inherited work, truth, sorrow, proof, apology, and a spring that waited under stone. She had inherited the chance to stop running without feeling trapped. In the last gold of evening, Claire understood that Raymond had not left her the farm to pull her backward into his life. He had left it as a bridge into her own. And sometimes the miracle is not a sudden fortune, or a shining sign from heaven. Sometimes it is water returning to a dry field, a faithful dog leading you to the place love was buried, and a home patient enough to wait until your heart is ready to come back.